So let us begin with the fourth module, which is water governance and water law. So before we try to understand this module, or before we dive into this module, we will try to briefly understand what is governance and what are the supporting pillars of the governance. Okay. So there are four pillars of any governance. You might have already heard about this. So the four pillars are: the first one is legislature, the next one is executive body, the third one is judiciary, and the fourth one is media, or called as journalism also. Okay. So we'll be discussing on the three pillars. We will not be discussing on the fourth pillar. Okay. So before we begin to understand all these four pillars, we have to understand what is the base or the foundation of these four pillars. So the foundation or base of these four pillars are Constitution. Okay. A book which is written with numerous guidelines, and those guidelines will help all these three pillars to frame the laws, principles, acts for general people. Okay. Now let us go with the first pillar, which is our executive pillar. So the legislative body. So what this legislative body does is, basically they are the elected representative of the public. Okay. So whatever the problems that are associated with the general public, they will bring into the parliament and they will discuss there. Okay. And they will try to frame the laws, rules and regulations, and to create an act. Okay. Now, in order to help these people frame the laws, policies and rules and regulations, executive body works. Okay. Now the third pillar is our judiciary. So what is the importance of the judiciary is, like for example, if the people have the problem with the laws that are framed, and if they find that some of their fundamental rights are violated, which are represented in the constitution, if it is violated, and if they find that there is a dispute with respect to the law that are framed, people can go up to the judiciary, and the judiciary acts as a negotiator between the people and the legislative and executive body. Okay. So if at all there is any law that is framed by legislative body or executive body that violates the fundamental rights or that violates the constitution, then the judiciary comes into the place and it acts as a mediator, and it resolves the problem that is existing between the general public and the legislative and executive body. Okay. Now, as I told you, I would not be discussing about the fourth pillar because it's media. Okay, it is completely out of the league, and they are completely independent of all these three bodies also. Okay, and the present condition of media is well understood, so there is no need to give a brief understanding about that. Okay, so now with understanding this background of how this entire governance works. Now basically we elect the people. Those elected people will frame the laws, rules, policies, and in order to frame the laws, rules and policies, executive body helps them, and then the judiciary body helps as a negotiator between the general public and the legislative body, if at all there is a dispute that is existing between them. Okay, so this is how the governance works. Now let us try to understand what is water governance and water laws. Okay, so to understand the water governance and water laws, there are several principles, laws and acts that are adopted, okay, over many decades. Okay, now let us understand what is the spectrum of this entire period in which the laws are framed. Okay, now for example, I'll tell you there are several laws that were existing from the colonial age. Colonial age means before the independence there were several laws, water laws, that were framed by the Britishers. Okay, so all those rules and regulations which are formed and the laws which are formed during the British period are also in the existence till today. Okay, so if you want to understand this entire spectrum in which the laws are framed, we need to even go back to the colonial age also. Okay, now understanding this, we will try to understand who basically, because we know that ours is a federal system. Federal system means what? There is a state government and there is also union government. This is also called a central government, right? So there are two legislative bodies who will frame the laws for us. So we will try to understand whether the water is a state subject or a central subject. Okay, so basically the water is both state subject and central subject. Okay, but state has more power over the water resource compared to the center. Okay, we will be understanding the substance of how the laws are framed by the state and how the laws are framed by the center. Okay, I'll generally give you a description or the overview of how the state frames the laws. Okay, basically most of the laws that are framed for water resources belongs to state itself. Like for example, I'll tell you the drinking water supply, the quality of drinking water supply, the sanitation, and what is the quality of sanitation that is to be maintained, and then with respect to groundwater or groundwater pollution, you try to understand this entire spectrum of creating the rules, regulation, policies, laws are associated with the state itself. So basically the state decides the way the water resources of that region has to be handled. Okay, so it's not the central government or the union government to decide upon the water resources problem. But where exactly the central government comes into the place, we need to understand. Okay, now for example, in case of dispute that are existing between the two states, like I'll give you an example. There is a dispute of water sharing between the two states, which is Karnataka and Tamil Nadu, which is called Kaveri water dispute, right? So whenever there existed water dispute between the two states, this is called as interstate. Two states are having a dispute of water sharing. There the central government or union government comes into existence and they resolve the problem of water sharing. Okay. Now if at all there is a differences between the water sharing within the state also, which is called as intra-state. Okay. Within the state, if there is a dispute of water sharing, there also the union government comes into the place and it resolves the problem that is associated. Okay. Now if at all, like India shares boundary with many of the other nations, like for example China is there, Nepal is there, then we have Myanmar, and then Bangladesh and Pakistan. So there are many rivers that flow across the countries, right? So whenever there is a dispute of water sharing between the two countries, there the state will not negotiate with respect to with any nation. The central government will negotiate and will try to resolve the dispute that is existing between the two countries which are sharing the boundaries also. Okay. Now you understood where the central government comes into act. Other than this, the central government will also act upon the laws or the policies which are framed for waterways or navigation. Okay, and then the tidal power also. Okay, so this is the basic legal framework. Now we'll try to understand how these laws are formed. Okay, so these laws are formed based on common law principles. I'll explain what is common law principles later. Then there are several irrigation acts are made, and I have also explained that there are several laws which are framed back into the age of British era also. Okay, I'll give a brief understanding of what is common law principle. Now, for example, there is a problem in sharing of water between two states. You try to imagine this. Okay, then the state government will try to resolve the problem by recommending the central government to come and resolve the dispute. If at all the central government will not be able to resolve the dispute, then both the state governments which are in the dispute will go to the judiciary. Okay, then assume that the judiciary has solved the problem of water sharing between the two states. Then what happens? That particular case will be registered. Okay, that particular case will be held as an example. Okay, now for example, if there is a water sharing problem within another two states, okay, if there is another dispute which is arrived between two different states, then what will happen is the earlier case or the earlier dispute which was resolved between the two states will be held as a reference to solve the existing case. Okay, so this is called as common law principle. So common law principle is such that whenever you want to solve any problem that is existing in the society, we will take the reference of the cases which existed before and which have been solved also. So with reference to all those cases which have similar in tendency with the existing case, by taking the reference of all those cases, we will try to resolve the present case also. Okay, this is what common law principle. So we will try to understand the substance of national water law. I'll give you the categories in which the national water laws are framed. One is surface water and groundwater irrigation. The next one is human rights and social and environmental aspects of water. The third one is dams. The fourth one is water cooperation with the neighbors. Okay. Now coming to the first part, which is surface and groundwater irrigation. Okay. So we basically know that there are several ways in which we allocate the water. There are several stakeholders of water resources. So I'll just give you the list in order to understand this. Like for example, we need to supply water for domestic purposes. We'll be supplying water for hydroelectric power generation. We'll be supplying water for irrigation supply. We'll be supplying water for industrial needs. There are many other stakeholders of water resources. Now, there are several laws which are formed in order to establish the priorities to be given. Like for example, the domestic water supply stands as the first priority to supply the water. Okay. The next important priority is to supply the water for irrigation, because India is having the huge population. In order to cater for the food security needs, so irrigation holds the second place as the priority to supply the water. Okay. So based on that, several state governments have framed its own irrigation acts. Like for example, Rajasthan, Madhya Pradesh, and then Bihar has framed its own irrigation acts. So recently the Karnataka has also framed its own irrigation act in order to supply more water, or to prioritize the water supply for the irrigation requirement. Okay. Next, the next important thing is that we know that most of our groundwater and surface water resources are polluted. So in order to bring down the pollution, several laws are framed. One of the laws which are framed are called as Environmental Protection Act. Under the Environmental Protection Act, there are several other categories also, but water holds the greater preference or priority in trying to solve the pollution. Okay. As you know that there is a pollution of air, there is a pollution of land, there is a pollution of water. So in all these three categories, the pollution of water is considered as more important. Okay. Now, in the recent days, we have found that we have been exploiting the lot of groundwater in order to supply to the irrigation. Okay. So I have also given you the data with respect to how much amount of irrigation water is supplied by the groundwater itself. So you can go back to the previous slides of surface water and groundwater resources. There you will come to know that more than 60% of irrigation supply comes from the groundwater itself. So it means what, most of the farmers are exploiting the groundwater rather than the surface water, right? So that's why it becomes very important at this point of time, so that we maintain a sustainable use of water resources, so that our future generation will also enjoy the existing water supply, or else we will be depleting the entire groundwater resources, and which will make unsustainable use of water, and in future generation there can be a scarcity of groundwater resources. There are several predictions in which they say that right now we are in the scarce condition itself. Okay, so instead of looking for the future, we have to look up for the sustainability for the existing condition. So that's why to regulate, control the development and management of the groundwater, there is another bill which was formed, another act was also framed in 2005. Going to the next category of substance of national water law, which is human rights and the social and environmental aspects of water. Here we will try to understand the laws which are framed considering water as a human right, and the laws which are framed with respect to conserving the environmental impacts of water and the social well-being of the water. Okay, so there are several court cases which try to interpret water as a human right. Okay, now there is an article which is called as Article 21. Article 21 says protection of life and personal liberty. No person shall be deprived of his life or personal liberty except according to the procedure established by the law. So this is what Article 21 says. Article 21 in brief says that right to life under the state. Okay. Now, as we know that water is the essential elixir, or we can call it as water is an essential commodity for the sustenance of life. Okay. So life exists based on water itself. Though water is a substance or a material, but it is a resources. So the equitable sharing of water resources becomes the prime importance. Okay, so that's why it becomes the basic human right also. Though this though the water is not considered as a basic human right under any article, but it is interpreted that water is a basic human right under right to life, because the life exists on the water itself, right? So there was a case between the Subhash Kumar and the state of Bihar. I'll try to read out that. The right to water is arguably implied in the recognition of the right to clean environment. In Subhash Kumar versus State of Bihar, the Supreme Court recognized that right to life includes the right of enjoyment of pollution-free water and air for full enjoyment of life. So this is what one of the case in which the Supreme Court ruled out that water is the right to life, right? So in that condition, it becomes that right to water is the right to life also. Okay. Now basically it was interpreted from the Article 21. Right? So in the next case, I will try to explain how the water is considered as a human right. Okay. We have heard about the famously Narmada Bachao Andolan. And the Narmada Bachao Andolan, again there was a dispute between the people, the riparian people and the state government. There again the Supreme Court has ruled out saying that state is the water is the basic need for the survival of human beings and is a part of right of life and human rights as enshrined in the Article 21 of the Constitution of India. So this is what the Supreme Court has said with respect to the case between the Narmada Bachao Andolan versus the Union of India 2000. Okay. Now we have understood that water is right to life, at the same time it is the human right also. Okay. The next case is to understand the social and environmental aspect of water. Okay. Now going to the environmental aspect of water, there was a case that was fought between M.C. Mehta and Kamal Nath. There the Supreme Court affirmed that water is the public trust, with the state as the trustee of all the natural resources which are by nature meant for public use and enjoyment. Okay. So the act, and there was also an act that was framed which was called as Prevention and Control of Pollution. This act seeks to prevent and control the water pollution and maintain and restore the wholesomeness of water. So this is what we have understood. There are several laws which are framed in order to say that water is right to life. Okay, and at the same time there are several laws which are framed in order to say that water should be clean and water should be pollution free. Okay. So we'll be discussing about the third category in the substance of national water law. There we'll try to understand because of the construction of dams, there are several impacts. Like for example, people will be displaced from their native place to somewhere else. Okay, so we need to rehabilitate them and also resettle those peoples. So this is the first problem. In order to solve this issue, there are several laws which are framed. Okay, the next issue with the construction of dam is the impact on the environment. Okay. So this was recognized in 1985. There they proposed the set of rules and regulations in order to study before we construct a huge dam, which is called as environmental impact assessment. Okay. Again, it has been, many of the critics says that after 1994 there was a lot of loosening up of all these values with respect to environment. So right now there is a lot of critics say that our environmental impact assessment underestimates the problem that are associated with the environment. Okay. Anyway, when we'll understand in detail about the environmental impact assessment, there we will be able to find out the problems that are existing in our laws. Okay. So resettlement and rehabilitation of land for the people living in the riparian value. This law which was framed is called as Land Acquisition Act, which was framed from the British law itself. So many of the critics of this law says that this goes back way into the colonial age. So that's why the Britishers have framed this rule in such a way that it will benefit the Britishers instead of the people of the native region. Okay, so the critics do not try to give more preference to this Land Acquisition Act, and they say this is a colonial rule, and because of this rule the people living in the riparian valley will get affected. Okay, so other than that, so there is no other rules which are framed with respect to acquiring the land in case of construction of dam, but in case of rehabilitation of people and resettlement of people, there are several laws are formed. Okay, so many of the rules are framed from the Narmada Bachao Andolan itself. Okay, but again the critics say that in case of laws which are framed for resettlement and rehabilitation, there is no land to land rehabilitation or compensation. Okay, so for example, if the land has been submerged because of construction of the dam, another land should be given. Okay, but in many of the projects what they do is that they will replace a land with the money. Okay, so this is the major dispute between the people and the law which is existing. Okay, but only in the case of construction of Sardar Sarovar Dam, land to land compensation was given, because Narmada Bachao Andolan enabled people to fight for land itself instead of money. Okay, so this is what the substance of national water law coming with respect to dam. Okay, next, going to the last one category, which is called as water cooperation with the neighbors. We know that we share several rivers with Nepal, we share several rivers with the Bangladesh, around more than 55 rivers flow from India to the Bangladesh, and there are many rivers which flow from Nepal to India and India to Nepal also, and the several rivers are or river tributaries are coming from China to India, and there is a river sharing between the Pakistan and India also. The famously a treaty that was made with the India and Pakistan is Indus Valley Treaty. Okay, most of the rivers which flow from India to Pakistan originates in India itself. So that's why Indus Valley Treaty was framed. Like this, there are several treaties which are framed between India and the other neighboring countries. So all these laws, all these treaties are framed under this category.